There is an audio file, 3 minutes and 14 seconds, recorded in the cardiac ICU of a Level 1 trauma center in Seattle, Washington. The charge nurse activated the room's documentation system because she did not know what else to do. She had been a nurse for 11 years. She had never heard anything like what she was hearing from inside that room. What you would hear, if you could listen to that file, is a woman's voice, clear, grammatically structured, moving through sentences with the rhythm of someone describing something specific to someone who can follow along, speaking fluent Mandarin. The woman's name is Angela. She is 49 years old. She grew up in Havre, Montana, a small city on the High Line near the Canadian border, about as far from any significant Chinese-speaking community as you can get in the continental United States. She has never been to China. She has never studied Mandarin. She has never studied Cantonese. Her family has spoken English and only English for 4 generations. She had been, at the moment that recording began, in cardiac arrest for 43 minutes. I have been trying to explain this case for 2 years. I cannot. Angela's cardiac arrest was not the result of any underlying condition she had been managing. It was the result of the cold. She had been hiking alone in the Beartooth Wilderness, a decision she had made impulsively, she told me, on a Friday afternoon in early March when she needed to be somewhere that was not her house. She was experienced enough to know the terrain and not experienced enough to have checked the updated weather reports before she left. The temperature dropped faster than the forecast had indicated. She lost the trail in the low light. She fell into a creek she had not seen under the snow. By the time the search and rescue team found her, her core body temperature had fallen to 22 degrees Celsius. 97% of the human body's enzymatic processes require a core temperature above 35 degrees Celsius to function. At 22, the heart loses its ability to maintain coordinated electrical activity. Angela's heart had gone into ventricular fibrillation during transport and transitioned to asystole, no electrical activity, no cardiac output, somewhere in the first hour of the rescue. The team made the decision to transport without attempting prolonged field resuscitation. In hypothermic cardiac arrest, the operating principle is this: the patient is not dead until they are warm and dead. Hypothermia slows the metabolism of every cell in the body, including the brain. It is a kind of protection, though a brutal one. The paramedics kept her moving toward the trauma center and let the ECMO team make the call. ECMO stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. A machine takes over the functions of the heart and lungs, oxygenating the blood, circulating it through the body, and in this case, rewarming it at a controlled rate. It is not a simple intervention. It requires a surgical team, a perfusionist, a specific set of conditions, and a hospital equipped for it. The Level 1 Trauma Center in Seattle had all of those things. Angela's total time of cardiac arrest, from estimated arrest onset to return of spontaneous circulation on the ECMO circuit, was 43 minutes and 20 seconds. She was clinically dead for 43 minutes and 20 seconds. The ECMO circuit brought her back. Her brain, by every imaging study performed in the days that followed, sustained no significant structural damage. She went home 19 days after the event in what her discharge paperwork described as good neurological condition. But before she went home, before she was coherent enough to answer orientation questions, before she could tell anyone her name or describe what had happened on that trail, she spoke Mandarin. When Angela was cognitively recovered enough to have a sustained conversation, 5 days after the event, in the step-down unit, she told the social worker assigned to her case that she had been somewhere while her heart was stopped. She did not use the phrase near-death experience. She had not been searching for language. She said, "I was in a river, and I need to tell someone what I saw there." The social worker passed the note to the attending physician, who passed it to the hospital's palliative care coordinator, who passed it through a colleague of mine in Portland. That is how I came to speak with Angela by phone 3 months after her discharge. She described what happened, the way people describe things when they are trying to be accurate rather than persuasive. Carefully, with pauses where the language stopped fitting. She was in the water, she said, but not in the way she had been in the creek. Not the cold, not the panic, not the sensory assault of freezing water filling her lungs. The opposite of that. Warmth that had texture to it. Warmth that felt inhabited rather than produced by a source. And she was moving through it, but not in the direction she would expect. Not down. She was being pulled upstream, toward something. She described the light the way almost everyone who has been in this space describes it. Not as a source you look at, but as a quality of the environment that makes everything else clear. She did not try to look at it directly. She was not interested in it, she said, because something else required her attention. There was a woman at a bend in the river. Angela knew her immediately. The way you know your own name, not from being taught it, but from something prior to teaching. She knew this woman the way she knew which hand was her right hand, without reasoning about it. She could not have known her. The woman had died in 1943, 22 years before Angela's mother was born. Angela had never seen a photograph of her, never heard a description, had not known she existed as anything more than a faint entry in a family Bible she had never opened as an adult. There was no conversation in the sense that I understand conversation. What passed between them was not language. It was understanding, direct and complete, the way that seeing someone's face is more complete than reading their description. Angela understood that she was not in the right place, that the right place would come, and she was being shown the direction of it, but the moment was not now. She understood that going back was going to require something from her, that it was going to hurt, not as a threat, but as a plain fact, the way a door being heavy is a fact, not a punishment. She chose to go back. She told me this without drama. She said, "I didn't feel like I had a lot of options I hadn't seen before, but I felt like that one was mine." She came back to a cardiac ICU in Seattle with a voice that was speaking a language she had never learned. The charge nurse's name is Linda Chen. She had grown up in a household where Mandarin was the primary language. Her parents had immigrated from Fujian Province in the early 1980s, and the language of the house had always been Mandarin first, English when necessary. She had been working in that ICU for 11 years. She told me she had heard a lot of things in those 11 years that were difficult to categorize. She had not heard this. She was charting at the nursing station outside Angela's room when she became aware of something coming from inside. She described it the way you describe a sound that interrupts a thought so completely that you lose the thread. She simply stopped what she was doing and turned toward the door. Her first impression, she told me, was that someone was speaking to her, that it was her mother's voice in the next room. That specific, that disorienting. It was not her mother. It was Angela, in the intermediate state between the space she had been and the room she was returning to. Not fully conscious, not responsive to commands, but producing language. Producing it with a fluency and a grammatical coherence that Linda recognized immediately and without ambiguity as Mandarin. Linda activated the room's documentation system. She went to the doorway. Angela was lying with her eyes partially open, speaking toward the ceiling, or toward something in the direction of the ceiling, in a voice that was unhurried and clear. Linda went to get May. May had grown up in Taipei. She had been nursing in the United States for 7 years. She came to the doorway and listened for a full 30 seconds before she spoke. Then she said quietly to Linda, "She is describing water. She is describing being pulled toward something. The recording is 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The first minute and 43 seconds is the clearest. The grammar is intact. The sentences form and complete." Linda and May sat together in the break room the following afternoon with a shared document open on May's laptop and produced a translation of what they could reconstruct from the audio. What Angela said in those first 103 seconds is this. She described a river. The word she used was not the standard modern Mandarin term. It was a regional variant that Linda identified as characteristic of northern dialects from earlier in the 20th century, not the standard Putonghua that would appear in any language course or textbook, a word that would be most familiar to someone who had learned Mandarin before the standardization reforms of the 1950s. Angela used it naturally. She used it the way people use the word for something they have always called by that name. She described warmth that had presence in it. She described being called toward a point where the river curved. She said a name, not a name that Linda or May recognized as connected to anything in Angela's chart, but a woman's name repeated 3 times in the pattern that May identified as the way her grandmother called to someone at a distance. Not shouting. The specific vocal quality of calling to someone who is not yet fully visible. In the second half of the recording, the grammar begins to dissolve. The individual words remain Mandarin, correct, recognizable words, but the sentences stop completing. And then, at the 2-minute and 41-second mark, Angela's voice shifts, drops in register, and she says, in English, clearly, "I don't want to go back yet." Then silence. Then, approximately 40 seconds later, in English, "What time is it?" That was her first orienting question. I spent 6 weeks confirming what I could confirm about Angela's linguistic history. She had completed high school Spanish, 2 years, nearly 2 decades before this event. No other language courses. Her medical records contain no reference to any language other than English as a primary or secondary language. Her family, going back 3 generations on both sides, had settled in northern Montana in the early 1900s. There were no Asian-born individuals in her family history that she was aware of, no documented exposure to Chinese-speaking communities in Havre, no travel outside the continental United States. Her daughter found the missionary. Angela had not known to look. It was the daughter, a woman in her early 30s, methodical in the way people become methodical when they are trying to understand something they cannot categorize, who went through the family records after the fact, after Angela told her about the woman at the bend in the river. Angela's maternal great-grandfather, her mother's father's father, had served as a Protestant missionary in Shanxi Province in northern China from 1931 to 1935. He had left when the Second Sino-Japanese War made remaining untenable. He had returned to Montana, married, had children, and died in 1971. He had never, to anyone's knowledge, taught any member of his family Mandarin. He died 22 years before Angela was born. There are no photographs of him in any home Angela grew up in. His name appears in a church administrative record and in a death certificate. That is the full extent of what the family knew. I want to be careful about what I am claiming here. I am not claiming a mechanism. I am noting that a specific regional variant of a Mandarin word, a variant characteristic of northern dialects from the early 20th century, not taught in contemporary language instruction, came out of the mouth of a woman who had been in cardiac arrest for 43 minutes, and that there is a thread, however thin, connecting that time and place to someone in her family line. I am not drawing a conclusion from that thread. I am noting that it is there. What I did next was go back to Ian Stevenson. Most people in medicine have heard of Stevenson in passing, the psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who spent 50 years studying cases of reincarnation and unusual knowledge. His division is still active at UVA. He published 2 books specifically on what he called xenoglossy, the production of an unlearned language. The first in 1974, the second in 1984. The academic reviews were divided. Linguists found many cases insufficient. Stevenson found a small number that he considered genuinely unexplained, and he drew a distinction that I found important when I applied it to Angela. He separated what he called recitative xenoglossy, someone producing fragments of a foreign language, individual words, without clear communicative intent, from responsive xenoglossy, which he defined as the ability to use a foreign language for actual communication, to produce grammatically structured sentences that respond to a context. Angela's 3 minutes and 14 seconds are not recitative. She was describing something. The grammar tracked with what she was describing. The regional variant she used was contextually appropriate to what she was saying. She used the old word for the river because she was talking about a river, and something in whatever she was accessing knew that word. Linda and May were not hearing random sounds. They were translating content. That is the category that Stevenson considered the hardest to explain. I need to tell you what I do when I encounter a case I cannot explain. I build an alternative. That is what my training gave me, and it is a useful tool, and I have applied it honestly across every case I have worked with since 2019. I look for the mechanism. I look for what the brain might have been doing, what the auditory system might have been retaining, what the pharmacology or the physiology could be producing that resembles the experience without requiring anything outside my clinical framework. In my own case, in the 19 minutes I was clinically dead on a table at Providence, Portland in 2019, I have, at minimum, a theoretical argument. My brain, while not functioning normally, was in a different physiological state than a brain in hypothermic cardiac arrest. There is a version of events in which some residual auditory processing was occurring even during cardiac arrest. Unlikely, poorly supported by the evidence, but theoretically available. I have held on to that version, not because I believe it fully, but because it gave me a way to keep one foot in the framework I spent 22 years building. Angela removes that foot. At 22 degrees Celsius, neurons do not fire. The electrochemical processes that underlie every function the brain performs, including language production, including memory access, including the construction of any experience whatsoever, do not occur. The brain, at that temperature, in a systole, is not doing anything. It is not hallucinating. It is not accessing stored language. It is not constructing a Mandarin vocabulary from residual exposure. It is, by every measurable standard we have, inactive. And then she spoke fluent Mandarin. I have a colleague, a neurologist I respect, who knows my work and knows about Angela's case, who told me the most likely explanation was cryptomnesia, the resurfacing of forgotten memories, exposure so minimal and so long ago that it was never consciously encoded but left some trace. I asked him where Angela would have been exposed to a pre-1950s Northern Mandarin dialect in rural Montana. He said, "We don't know all the pathways." I said, "That is not an explanation. It is the absence of one." Kenneth Ring spent 40 years at the University of Connecticut studying what happens to people after near-death experiences. One of the things he documented across hundreds of cases was the acquisition of capacities that could not be traced to prior learning, musical abilities, mathematical intuitions, artistic skills that had no precedent in the person's history. He was careful about the mechanisms he proposed, but the pattern was there. What I keep returning to is this: the same technology that gave Angela her life back, the ECMO circuit, the hypothermic cardiac arrest protocol, also documented with clinical precision that her brain was not available to do what her voice was doing. The machine that saved her is also the machine that removes the last mechanism I had available. Something spoke through Angela in that room. I don't know what to call it. I am not a theologian, and I am not going to become one. But I know what it was not. It was not her brain. If you have spent any part of your life building a framework that keeps the hardest question at arm's length, that gives you a clean, clinical reason why the experiences people describe at the edge of death are just the brain doing what brains do when they stop, I understand. I built the same framework. I built it carefully, and I maintained it for a long time, and I was good at it. Angela did not set out to dismantle it. She was just trying to tell someone about a river. What I have been sitting with, in the 2 years since I started looking into this case, is a question I cannot resolve. If the brain, in a systole at 22 degrees Celsius, is not the origin of what Angela produced in those 3 minutes and 14 seconds, then what is? And if something other than her brain was doing that, if something other than the neural tissue in cardiac arrest was holding language, accessing a dialect, describing a woman at a bend in a river, then what else was it holding? What did Angela know in that space that we have no framework for yet? I don't have the answer. I'm not sure the answer fits in language. But I believe Angela was somewhere. And I believe something there knew her well enough to send her back speaking words she had never learned. Take care of each other.